It started with the sound of gravel under my shoes, the faint clink of my keys in my hand, and the slow creeping sense that I wasn't gonna make it to my front door without being stopped. I had just turned up the walkway, still halfway through biting my nail on my thumb, when I heard him. Not a yell, not even a shout, just that low, deliberate tone that somehow carried clearer than any raised voice ever could. "Come here a minute." I stopped mid-step like he'd pressed a pause button on my spine. My foot hovered, then slowly lowered. His voice always had that effect. A calm, quiet, but not too heavy to ignore. I turned towards the hedge, already knowing who it was before I even saw him. Mr. Halden. My neighbor. Not my mentor, not my dad, not my anything. And yet, somehow, still someone whose approval I couldn't seem to brush off. He was standing on the side of the fence, just past the big bush, one hand resting on the gatepost like he'd been waiting there. He wasn't glaring. He didn't have to. But that look, the one that didn't blink, didn't bulge, just measured everything you were saying, was already doing the work. I didn't know if he'd seen it. The cup, the stupid drink I tossed towards the storm drain 2 blocks back. Or maybe it was the shortcut. The way I cut through the hedges again, even though he mentioned, gently but firmly, last week that they weren't meant to be a path. Or maybe it wasn't anything I did today. Maybe it was everything. The pattern, the slack, the shrug I started to wear like a second skin lately. I tried to read him, but you couldn't read Mr. Halden. Not really. He didn't wear his moods in loud colors like most people. He wore them in pauses, in the way he glanced at something just a second longer than necessary. Like now. Like the way his eyes flickered to the next exact patch of hedge that I'd stepped through. The branches still looked disturbed. One leaf clung to my sock. I reached down to brush it away, then thought better of it and left it there. He noticed. Of course he noticed. My fingers tightened around my keys. I started, voice light, but he lifted one hand, not to stop me rudely, but to stop me clearly. A single steady motion, and I closed my mouth. He looked at me for a long second, then nodded, more to himself than to me. "I watched a lot from this side of the fence," he said, finally. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that made you feel like you shouldn't be standing straight, that you should be standing straighter. "Little things, some worse than others, most of it I let pass." He tilted his head slightly. "Not this time." I swallowed. The silence after that wasn't long, but it felt long, like he was giving me space to feel it before he continued. The kind of silence that made your shoes feel loud, your breath feel wrong. I waited, arms crossed loosely in front of me, unsure whether to speak, to move, to explain. But nothing in his expression invited that. Not yet. "Inside the gate," he said simply. "Close it behind you." I obeyed, not because I was scared of him, but because there was something in his tone that left no room for negotiation. No heat, no drama, just order. I pushed the gate open slowly, the old hinges giving a soft groan in protest, then stepped inside, closing it gently behind me like he asked. He didn't tell me where to stand, but I stopped in the center of the stone path that led towards his back patio. He hasn't moved yet, but he was still at the fence post, watching me, and I could feel it. That sense that he wasn't going to be the one that was going to give a quick talk that you shake off and forget. This was going to be one of those times that stuck. He didn't rush to speak, just let the moment stretch like it needed to. Like there was more value in silence than scolding. I stayed still, unsure where to look. At the hedge I just walked through, at the ground, or at him. I settled for somewhere in the middle. My posture wasn't perfect, but I felt like he expected it to be, so I shifted. Shoulders back, arm loose, chin neutral. A weird thing happens when someone doesn't yell. You end up correcting yourself harder than they had. I imagine you think I care about the hedge, he finally said, stepping forward. His walk was slow, deliberate, not because he was old, but because he didn't do anything on purpose. That I'm out here this afternoon because of some snapped branches or flattened root. I didn't say anything, and I didn't nod. He hadn't asked a question. He paused near one of the stepping stones, towing a small patch of moss to one side of his boot. But it's not the hedge, and it's not the cup. His eyes flickered towards the street. It's the fact that neither made you stop, not even for a second. That landed. Not hard, but deep. The kind of sentence that you didn't need to be repeated to be remembered. He turned and finally looked at me fully in the eye. You lived on this street your whole life. You know the rhythm of it, the way we keep things, the unspoken things we don't write down because they don't need to be. He paused. Or didn't need to be. I felt a flush creep up the back of my neck. I watched your father rake leaves before the sun came up every October, he said, quieter now. Watched him stand outside on Saturdays just to wave to the garbage truck. I've seen him pick gum wrappers that weren't his, sweep curves he didn't shove, close gates he didn't open. Not once for credit, just because that's how we do things around here. I nodded softly. I know. He raised his eyebrows slightly. Do you? I caught the shift in his voice, the way he questioned came out, not rhetorical, but pointed. I hesitated, then answered like I meant it. Yes, sir. He gave the faintest nod, like that answer earned me permission to keep standing there. He folded his arms, gaze steady. We don't have written rules on this street. We don't need HOA newsletters or clipboard patrols. You know what we have? I shook my head gently. No, Mr. Halden. Standards, he said. Ones we pass down by example. And when someone starts acting like those standards don't apply to them, it's not just a problem, it's a shift. One that spreads faster than you think. He let that sink in before adding, and one that starts with a crushed hedge. I looked down at the grass near my shoe. One blade stuck out bent, half torn where my foot had been. My throat tightened. I wanted to say something. An apology, explain, a fix, but nothing I could offer felt worthy of undoing the weight of what he just said. So I said nothing. He didn't need a clipboard or a list in hand. I could already feel it coming. The moment when the conversation stopped being the one thing and started becoming about everything. About the trends, the slide, the shrug that I had given things that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. I braced for it without moving. "You know, this isn't the first time I called you over," he said. He didn't ask it like a question. He just stated it and left it open, like I was supposed to carry it from there. I gave a small nod. "Yes, sir." He nodded once in return. "Last month, it was the ladder you borrowed from my shed without asking. Left it out in the rain." He turned slightly, not for effect, just a glance towards the side of the garage, like it was a memory still fresh enough to look at. "Week before that, you shouted at the city worker over recycling bins and slammed your car door so hard it shook the delivery guy. I heard it. So did Mrs. Walker 2 doors down." He let each example fall into the air like a slow drip, not to drown me in guilt, but to make sure this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a heat of the moment correction. This was a quiet result of quiet observance. "I didn't say anything then," he continued. "Figured maybe you were having a rough stretch. Maybe the season was wearing thin. People get tired. Life gets loud. I get it." That part, that administration, somehow made the weight of his words hit even harder. He wasn't above understanding. He wasn't here to scold. He was here because I pushed too far into a space where the pattern couldn't be ignored anymore. "But see," he went on, "the only thing about standards, the quiet, kind, the kind that kept a neighborhood like this from falling apart, is that they work if people uphold when no one is looking." I glanced at him, the way he stood, not puffed up, not posturing, just firm, rooted, like the rules weren't something he made up, that they were something he reported to, something older than either of us. He let his eyes settle on mine again. "You think I care about a hedge, about a cup?" He shook his head slowly. "I care about the fact that none of it made you stop, not even for a second." I pulled my chest tight again, because he was right. I didn't pause, not once, not because I meant to be cruel or disrespectful, but because I didn't think anyone would notice, because I thought it didn't matter. "I wasn't trying to be," I started, but he held up that hand again, same as before, calm, direct. "No justifications. Not today." I bit the inside of my cheek and nodded again. "Yes, sir." He didn't nod this time. He just turned and walked slowly towards the porch. I followed, quieter now, the weight of my own actions starting to land heavier than his voice ever could. The porch creaked beneath his boots as he stepped onto it. Not fast, not without any urgency, but the quiet intention of someone who knew exactly how this would unfold. He didn't glance back to check if I was following. He didn't need to. I kept a respectful distance behind him. Not too close, not too far, just where I sensed I was supposed to be. The whole world felt narrowed down to this moment. This yard, this still air between us. He didn't sit. Instead, he picked up a plain folding chair that had been leaning against the siding. Old metal legs, weathered canvas black, and set it down at the patch of shade by the garden wall, angle not at him, not at the house, but towards the street. Then he walked past me and went back inside. I stood alone on the porch for a few long seconds, uncertain, until the door opened again. In his hand, he held a small wooden clipboard, a sheet of lined paper clipped to it, and a pen tucked at the top. No lectures, no handouts, just those two things. He handed them to me without commentary. Then, finally, he spoke. "I want you to sit." I obeyed, lowering myself into the folding chair slowly, the metal legs shifting slightly on the uneven stone. The clipboard felt light in my hands, too light for how heavy the air had become. "Write this at the top," he said, standing over me. His voice didn't change, still set steady, still impossibly calm. "We don't lower the standards just because no one's looking." I paused, then nodded, setting the clipboard against my thigh and clicking the pen. My handwriting became smaller than usual, tighter. I wrote the sentence just as he said it. "We don't lower the standards just because no one's looking." I looked up. He was watching the street, arms crossed, still. "You think you understand that?" he asked, gaze forward. I hesitated. "Yes, sir." He turned to look at me, not to challenge, but to read the answer in my face, to check if the words were not just being spoken, but actually being carried. "Not just the rules," he added. "Standards. There's a difference." I nodded. "Yes, sir." He stepped closer and gestured lightly to the clipboard. "Now you're gonna write it again, 10 times. Slowly, not rushed. You're not being punished. You're being made clear. There's a difference." There was no edge to his voice, no sarcasm, no smugness, just clarity. Like it wasn't up for discussion, but it wasn't there to humiliate me. I looked back down at the paper, wrote the same sentence again, then again, and the rhythm started to settle in my chest. Not mechanical, but mindful. It wasn't about punishment, it was about presence, about understanding the weight of a standard enough to put it into ink, not once, but until it stayed. I had written the line 6 times until he spoke again. No warning, no shift in tone, just his voice, low and exact. "Did you know you weren't supposed to cut through that hedge?" I didn't look up right away. I finished the loop in the G in looking, then put my pen down and answered without hesitation. "Yes, sir." His boots moved closer, slow on the path beside me. "Did you know it wasn't your ladder you took last month?" The answer caught in my throat for half a second, not because it wasn't obvious, but because hearing it spoken out loud by someone else made the carelessness harder to swallow. "Yes, sir." He stopped a few steps behind me. I could hear the faint shift of weight as he folded his arms again. "Did you know to throw that drink cup because you thought no one would see?" I stared at the clipboard, at the sentence I'd written over and over like it was some kind of quiet prayer. I didn't want to answer that one. Not really, but I owed it. "Yes, sir." The air didn't change. He didn't sigh. He didn't scold. He just let it settle, like a stone dropping into still water with ripples that took their time. "Do you think that made it acceptable?" My voice was quieter this time, but the words were solid. "No, sir." He didn't respond right away. I heard the soft sound of the garden wind chime twisting in a slow breeze. A few birds chirp somewhere farther down the block, but between us, silence. He let me stay in the stillness for a while, long enough for me to reread the sentence on the page without him even telling me to, long enough to feel what it actually meant. Then he walked around the chair and stood a few feet in front of me, still looking down at the block like he wasn't talking about today, but about the future, about the kind of person I was going to decide the next time to be when no one was watching.
We don't lower the standards just because no one is looking, he repeated slowly. If that doesn't mean anything to you, then this isn't gonna stick.
I set the pen down on my lap and folded my hands. My voice didn't shake. It means something now, sir. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. But something in his eyes softened. Not warmth exactly, just a flicker of recognition. Like he believed me, or at least he believed I wanted to believe it. He didn't speak again for a while after that. He just stood nearby, not looming, not hovering, but present, the way a craftsman watches a student measure twice before cutting. I picked up the pen back and wrote the same sentence again. Then again, slowly, the words began to stretch. Each repetition pulled something a little tighter inside me. We don't lower the standards just because no one else is looking. By the 7th line, I stopped thinking about how many more I had to write and started thinking about how many more times I had chosen the easier option, stepping through the hedge instead of going around, tossing something small into a drain because it was faster, grabbing what I needed without asking. Each one felt harmless at the time, like little things didn't carry weight. But writing it now, over and over, made the patterns impossible to unsee. I didn't rush the last 3. I took my time, pausing between each as if the act of writing wasn't just copying anymore, but agreeing, committing, not under pressure, just under the presence of someone who still expected better. When I finished the 10th line, I set the pen down and placed the clipboard on my lap. I didn't announce I was done. I didn't need to. Mr. Halden had been watching. He knew.
Good,
he said softly, stepping forward and taking my clipboard from my hands. He looked at the page but didn't comment on my handwriting. He didn't critique the spacing. It wasn't about the neatness. It was about the effort, about the intention. He held the clipboard by his side, then glanced towards the street.
You ever notice that mailbox across the road?
He asked. I looked up. Yes, sir.
Been leaning crooked for years, he said. Nobody ever fixed it.
I wasn't sure if he was making a point or if it was just an observation, but he kept going.
Not because it's broken beyond repair, but because everyone assumes someone else will take care of it. They pass it each day, and day after day, eventually they don't see it at all.
He paused, then turned his eyes back to me.
You keep lowering the standard just because no one else is watching. Eventually, you even forget where the line used to be.
I didn't have a reply to that, at least not one that would sound like a performance, so I nodded slowly. He nodded back. Once.
You're done the writing. Now, you're gonna do the seeing.
He walked past me then, not quickly, not dramatically, just with the same quiet confidence he carried through everything, and stepped down off the porch onto the path that curved along the hedges. I stayed seated, spine upright now, without being told, and watched as he moved towards the edge of the yard. He bent slightly and picked up something from beneath the low branches. A gum wrapper, silver and flattened, almost camouflaged in the grass. He held it for a second, not to shame, just to show. Then he folded it in half and slipped it into his pocket. I followed his movement with my eyes, not because I was told to, but because it felt like I was supposed to witness it. Not the cleanup, but the care. The kind of noticing that happens when you treat a space around you like it matters. He walked to the border of his yard like someone inspecting it more than a property. Like he was checking the pulse of something that couldn't speak for itself. At one point, he stopped near a corner of the fence where the sidewalk curved. He reached down again, this time to straighten a small wooden stake that had been shifted in the earth. A boundary marker, maybe, or just something he planted to keep things even. I watched the way he adjusted it, not lazily, not out of habit, but with both hands, lining it up with the others like it had to be right. Not perfect, just right. He didn't say anything as he worked. He didn't look back to see if I was watching. He didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. I was supposed to see all of it. Every quiet act of care, every unnoticed detail, every choice to restore order where it had been slipped. By the time he made his way back, the sky had shifted subtly. The late afternoon light was starting to soften. He stood at the edge of the porch again and looked at me. For a moment, I wondered if he asked me to repeat the sentence again, or if he'd start with another round of questions. But he didn't. Instead, he said,
Most people think discipline is loud, but the real kind, the kind that lasts, it happens in silence.
I nodded. My voice was steady now, less defensive, less nervous. Yes, sir. You're gonna... He stepped aside and gestured towards the yard where he'd been standing.
You're gonna sit there next, facing the street, 5 minutes. No phone, no fidgeting, just quiet.
I stood slowly. Yes, sir. And then, quietly, I moved to my place, not as punishment, but as something closer to presence. Something that was starting to settle in me more than without him needing to raise his voice. The spot he pointed to wasn't marked, wasn't formal, just a stretch of level grass near the curb, where the sidewalk bent slightly and the street sloped away in a gentle curve. I walked over without speaking, brushing back the back of my jeans out of instinct and lowering myself until I was seated, cross-legged, hands folded in my lap. There was no chair this time, no clipboard, just me and the quiet. The afternoon breeze stirred at the trees across the street. A sprinkler clicked somewhere 2 houses down. The air smelled faintly like cut grass and pavement dust. I didn't look towards the porch, but I could feel his presence, not watching like a hawk, but like a weight, steady and patient. He wasn't standing there with a timer. He wasn't pacing. He was just present, which somehow made me feel like I needed to be too. The first minute was the longest, not because I was uncomfortable, but because I wasn't used to the stillness, to do nothing on purpose. My fingers twitched at first, reaching instinctively for a phone that wasn't in my pocket. My mind started to wander, to replay the earlier parts of the day, to build little distractions. But each time it drifted, something about the quiet, the open street, The sound of wind chimes 4 porches down pulled me back. I looked straight ahead, not for anything in particular, just at the neighborhood I always move through too fast. There was a cracked bit of sidewalk I always step over, the street sign that leaned a little to the left, the gate of the Winston's fence that never closed all the way. I saw them all now, not just as the background, but as parts of a space I lived in. There was nothing dramatic happening, no lessons being shouted, no punishments being dealt, just to ask, sit still, watch, let it land. I thought the sentence I'd written 10 times, now etched in my mind even more firmly than before. We don't lower the standards just because no one else is looking. No one was looking now, just me, and suddenly that felt more than enough. The breeze lifted again, a single leaf drifted across the sidewalk in front of me. I didn't move to kick it aside, I just watched it roll, slow and quiet, like it had somewhere else to be. Or nowhere else to be, and for once, neither did I. I didn't know exactly when the 5 minutes ended, but I didn't need a clock to feel it. There was a shift, a light, in the weight of the air, the way that my shoulders started to settle instead of brace. I heard the porch creak behind me, not in a rush, not a stomp, just one steady footfall at a time. I didn't turn around, I waited. Then I heard his voice again, low but closer now, just behind me.
You can stand.
I rose slowly, brushing off the back of my jeans again, more out of habit than mess. I turned to face him. Mr. Halden was standing with his arms crossed again, clipboard still tucked under one elbow. But this time, he didn't look disappointed. He looked clear, steady, the way someone looks when they said what they needed to say and now are watching it if it sticks.
You're not the worst kid on the block,
he said plainly.
Not by a mile.
That surprised me. Not the words, but the way he said them. Like he wasn't offering comfort, just truth.
But good intentions don't excuse bad habits, he added. And being capable doesn't mean much if you walk through life like no one else matters.
I nodded slowly. Yes, sir. He studied me for a long moment, then said,
I don't expect perfection. I never have.
He glanced towards the hedge, now slightly bent from where I cut through it earlier, then back at me.
But if you're gonna live on this street, if you're gonna walk through these yards, wave to these neighbors, share this sidewalk, then I expect presence, full presence, because standards don't keep themselves. We do.
He didn't ask if I understood. He didn't need to. Instead, he just waited, letting the words settle, not forcing anything. So I gave him what he was really looking for. I understand, I said, then with more weight behind it, more clarity than I used all day. Yes, sir. His shoulders softened a fraction, not relaxed, just accepted, like a moment was complete, like something had landed where it was supposed to. He didn't say anything else, just gave a slight nod, one that meant the moment was done. Not erased, not forgotten, just concluded. He turned and walked back towards the porch, the clipboard still tucked under his arm, like it didn't carry a punishment, but it carried a reminder. I stood still for a moment longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because moving felt like ending something I didn't quite want to let go of just yet. But then I turned. I stepped off the grass and I began walking towards my side of the hedge. And this time, I didn't cut through it. I followed the path around the front, the long way, the right way. I could feel the difference in every single step I took, the slow press of the new awareness, of the dignity returned to the small, unseen actions. And I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The weight of what just happened, not the scolding, not the silence, but the standard, was really sitting with me. And unlike the guilt, it didn't hurt. It didn't ache, but it steadied. And when I reached my own front porch, I paused. This time, it wasn't out of fear, but it was out of habit. The new kind. The kind of habit that had been quietly set aside inside me for the past 30 minutes. I looked out at the street, glanced at the same cracked sidewalk, same crooked mailbox, and the same porch lights waiting to flicker on. But to me, it didn't look the same anymore. Not to me. And I knew, without being told by my parents, by the other neighbors, or even by Mr. Halden, that from this point forward, how I moved through this street would mean something different. Not to any of them, but to myself, to me. Because now, I knew what it looked like to be seen without being shamed, to be held without being punished, to be taught without being torn. And I knew it all and thanked Mr. Halden, because I didn't need to write that sentence again. It was already written where it mattered. Because we don't lower the standard just because no one's looking. And from now, neither would I.